The acrid stench of decay permeated the air as Jackson Creed trudged through the desolate wasteland of Kronos 7. His weathered boots sank into the ash and soil, with each step a grim reminder of the toxic environment that had become his prison. The orange-tinted sky loomed overhead, a constant reminder of the poisonous atmosphere that had claimed countless lives since his arrival 3 months ago. Jackson's piercing blue eyes scanned the horizon, ever vigilant for potential threats. His once pristine jumpsuit, now tattered and stained, bore witness to the harsh realities of life on this godforsaken planet. As he navigated the treacherous terrain, his mind wandered to the series of events that had led him to this hellish place. For 15 years, Jackson had been a master of evasion, slipping through the fingers of Galactic Alliance justice like sand through an hourglass. His reputation as a smuggler of rare artifacts had earned him both wealth and notoriety throughout the galaxy. But even the most skilled fugitive couldn't outrun fate forever. The memory of his last deal played out in his mind like a cruel hologram. The antique Zephyrian crystal, said to possess unimaginable power, had been his ultimate prize. Its iridescent surface had captivated him, blinding him to the danger that lurked in the shadows. The sting operation had been flawless, the Galactic Alliance agents materializing from thin air just as the credits were about to change hands. Jackson's hand instinctively went to the small scar behind his ear, a souvenir from the scuffle that ensued. He had fought like a cornered animal, desperation fueling his every move. But in the end, the sheer number of agents had overwhelmed him. The last thing he remembered before losing consciousness was the triumphant smirk on the lead agent's face. When he awoke, he found himself on a transport ship bound for Kronos 7, a name that sent shivers down the spine of even the most hardened criminals. The prison planet's reputation was well known throughout the galaxy, a place of no return, where the very air you breathe was a death sentence. As Jackson continued his solitary trek across the barren landscape, he couldn't help but marvel at the cruel irony of his situation. Here he was, surrounded by death and decay, yet his body showed no signs of succumbing to the toxic atmosphere. While other inmates withered away, their skin erupting in painful ulcers and their lungs struggling for every breath, Jackson remained unaffected. At first, he had attributed his immunity to sheer luck, or perhaps a miscalculation in the planet's supposed lethality. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the truth became undeniable. Something within him was different, changed in a way that defied explanation. Jackson's musings were interrupted by a distant rumble. He froze, his senses on high alert. In the unforgiving terrain of Kronos 7, every sound could signal danger. His hand instinctively went to the makeshift weapon at his hip, a crude shiv fashioned from scrap metal he'd scavenged from the wreckage of a guard's vehicle. The rumbling grew louder, accompanied by the sound of shifting rocks. Jackson's eyes darted to a nearby outcropping, seeking cover. As he crouched behind the jagged formation, he caught sight of the disturbance's source. A massive landslide was cascading down a distant hill, sending plumes of toxic dust into the air. Jackson held his breath, not out of fear of the poison, but out of habit. As the dust settled, he noticed something peculiar glinting in the debris field. Curiosity piqued. He cautiously made his way towards the site of the landslide. As he drew closer, the glint resolved into the unmistakable shape of a control panel. Jackson's heart raced with excitement. Technology was a rare and valuable commodity on Kronos 7, zealously guarded by the prison's administration and coveted by the inmates. Whatever this was, it could be his ticket to improving his chances of survival. With practiced ease, Jackson began to excavate the panel from the rubble. His fingers worked deftly, careful not to damage the delicate circuitry. As he cleared away the last of the debris, he realized he had stumbled upon something far more significant than a simple control panel. Before him lay the partially exposed entrance to what appeared to be an old mine. Jackson's mind raced with possibilities. The mine could offer shelter, perhaps even resources that could tip the scales in his favor. But it could also harbor untold dangers. On Kronos 7, nothing came without a price. After a moment's hesitation, Jackson made his decision. With a deep breath, he activated the control panel. To his surprise, it hummed to life, emergency lights flickering weakly along the tunnel's entrance. Taking one last look at the desolate landscape behind him, Jackson stepped into the darkness of the mine. The air inside the tunnel was thick with dust and the lingering traces of industrial chemicals. Jackson's eyes struggled to adjust to the dim light as he ventured deeper into the unknown. The walls were lined with strange, pulsating veins that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. He resisted the urge to touch them, wary of their potential toxicity. As he navigated the winding passages, Jackson's mind was alert for any sign of danger. The eerie silence was broken only by the occasional drip of some unseen liquid and the crunch of gravel beneath his feet. He had no idea how far he had traveled or how deep underground he was, but a nagging feeling in his gut told him he was on the verge of discovering something significant. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Jackson froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his makeshift weapon. He squinted into the gloom, trying to discern the source of the disturbance. For a moment, all was still. Then, without warning, a figure emerged from the shadows. Jackson's breath caught in his throat as he found himself face to face with a being unlike any he had encountered before. The figure was undeniably female, with a lithe, graceful form that seemed to defy the harsh environment. But it was her skin that truly captivated him, a mesmerizing shade of blue that seemed to emit a soft, ethereal glow in the dim light of the tunnel. For a tense moment, they regarded each other in silence, neither daring to make the first move. Then, to Jackson's surprise, the alien spoke. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, her voice a melodious blend of curiosity and wariness. "This sector is off limits to inmates." Jackson raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "I'm not here by choice," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. "I found the entrance after a landslide. I'm just trying to survive, like everyone else on this god-forsaken rock." The alien's luminous eyes studied him intently, as if trying to gauge the truth of his words. After what felt like an eternity, she seemed to reach a decision. "I am Nera Solis," she said, lowering the device she had been pointing at him. Some kind of scanner, Jackson realized. "I'm not a prisoner. My ship crashed here due to a navigation error." Jackson's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Crashed? But how did you survive the atmosphere? It's lethal to everyone except..." He trailed off, the implications of his own immunity suddenly taking on new significance. Nera Solis's expression shifted to one of intense interest. "Except you," she finished for him. "You've been exposed to the toxins, haven't you? Yet you show no signs of contamination." Jackson nodded slowly, still trying to process the situation. 3 months now, I've watched others die around me, but for some reason the poison doesn't affect me. Nera Solis's eyes lit up with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. She raised her scanner, its soft blue light washing over Jackson's form. As she studied the readout, her expression grew increasingly animated. "This is impossible," she murmured, her fingers dancing across the device's surface. "Your DNA. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. It's as if it's mutated, interacting with and neutralizing them." Jackson felt a surge of hope mixed with trepidation. What does that mean? Can it help us get off this planet? Nira Solis looked up from her scanner, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his breath catch. "It means," Jackson creed, "that you might be the key to saving not just yourself, but everyone on Chrono 7. Your blood could be the foundation for creating an antidote." So as the weight of Nira Solis's words sank in, Jackson felt a strange mix of emotions wash over him. Hope, fear, and a sense of responsibility he had never experienced before battled for dominance in his mind. He had spent years looking out for only himself, but now the fate of countless lives potentially rested in his hands. "An antidote," Jackson repeated, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. "But how? We're trapped on a prison planet with no resources, no lab equipment. And even if we could create one, how would we distribute it? The guards, the gangs, they'd never allow it." Nira Solis's determination seemed to radiate from her glowing skin. "We start small," she said, her voice filled with resolve. "My ship may be beyond repair, but its medical bay is still somewhat functional. We can use it as a makeshift lab. As for distribution, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Right now, we need to focus on synthesizing the cure." Jackson ran a hand through his unkempt hair, his mind racing with the possibilities and dangers that lay ahead. "This is insane," he muttered. "A few hours ago, I was just trying to survive another day. Now you're talking about saving the entire planet." Nira Solis placed a gentle hand on his arm, the touch sending an unexpected jolt through his body. "I know it's overwhelming," she said softly. "But think about it, Jackson. This could be your chance at redemption, a way to wipe the slate clean and start anew." Her words struck a chord deep within him. Redemption. It was something he had never dared to hope for, not since he had first chosen the path of a smuggler. Could this be his opportunity to make amends for all the lives he had indirectly harmed through his illegal activities? Before Jackson could respond, a distant rumble echoed through the tunnel, causing loose pebbles to skitter across the ground. Both he and Nira Solis tensed, their eyes darting to the darkness behind them. "We're not safe here," Nira Solis whispered urgently. "The tunnels are unstable, and there are things in the depths that are better left undisturbed. We need to move." Jackson nodded, his survival instincts kicking into high gear. "Lead the way," he said, gesturing for Nira Solis to go ahead. "I've got your back." As they navigated the treacherous tunnels, Jackson's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. He had entered this mine seeking shelter and resources, but he had found something far more valuable: hope. For the first time since his arrival on Chrono 7, he felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. The journey through the winding passages was fraught with danger. More than once, they had to press themselves against the slimy walls as tremors shook the tunnel, sending cascades of rocks and dust raining down around them. Jackson found himself instinctively shielding Nira Solis with his body, surprising himself with his protective instinct towards this alien he had just met. As they climbed over a particularly treacherous section of collapsed tunnel, Nira Solis suddenly lost her footing. Jackson's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist and pulling her to safety, just as a chunk of the floor crumbled away, revealing a bottomless chasm below. For a moment they stood there, hearts pounding, bodies pressed close in the narrow space. Jackson became acutely aware of the warmth of Nira Solis's skin, the faint, sweet scent that seemed to emanate from her arm. Their eyes met, and for a brief instant, the dangers around them faded away. The moment was shattered by a bone-chilling screech that echoed through the tunnels. Nera Solis's eyes widened in fear. "We need to move now," she hissed, tugging Jackson along as she quickened her pace. They emerged from the mine into a different section of the planet's surface. The toxic orange sky seemed even more ominous here, the air thick with swirling particles that stung Jackson's eyes. In the distance, he could make out the twisted wreckage of what must have been Nera Solis's ship. As they approached the crash site, Jackson's trained eye took in the details. The ship was of a design he had never seen before, its sleek lines and iridescent hull speaking of technology far beyond anything in common use. Despite the extensive damage, he could see that parts of it were still operational, faint lights blinking on various panels. Nera Solis led him to a partially intact section, her fingers dancing over a hidden control panel. With a soft hiss, a door slid open, revealing the interior of the ship. Jackson followed her inside, marveling at the advanced technology that surrounded him. The medical bay was a marvel of alien engineering. Holographic displays flickered to life as they entered, showing readouts in a script Jackson couldn't decipher. Nera Solis moved with purpose, activating various devices and pulling out equipment that looked more suited to a top-tier research facility than a crashed ship. "We don't have much time," Nera Solis said, as she began setting up what looked like a sophisticated analysis station. "The ship's power cells are running low, and once they're depleted, we'll lose access to this equipment." Jackson nodded, rolling up his sleeve. "What do you need from me?" Nera Solis approached him with a device that looked unsettlingly like a large needle. "I need to take a sample of your blood," she explained. "The more we can gather, the better our chances of synthesizing an effective antidote." Jackson steeled himself as Nera Solis inserted the needle. He watched, fascinated, as his blood flowed into the collection chamber. The liquid seemed to shimmer slightly, unlike any blood he had seen before. As Nera Solis worked, Jackson took the opportunity to study her more closely. Her movements were graceful yet precise, speaking of years of scientific training. But there was something more, a determination in her eyes that spoke of personal stakes in this mission. "You're a xenobiologist, aren't you?" Jackson asked, breaking the silence. Nera Solis looked up from her work, surprise evident on her face. "How did you know?" Jackson shrugged. "The way you handle the equipment, your understanding of and toxins. Plus, not many people would crash land on a prison planet and immediately start working on saving its population." A small smile played at the corners of Nera Solis's mouth. "You're more observant than I gave you credit for, Jackson Creed. Yes, I'm a xenobiologist. I was on a research mission when my ship's navigation system malfunctioned, bringing me here." "Lucky for me," Jackson said, then immediately felt foolish. Lucky wasn't exactly the word for crash landing on a toxic planet. To his surprise, Nera Solis's smile widened. "Perhaps it was luck," she said softly. "Or perhaps it was something more. The universe works in mysterious ways, Jackson. Sometimes it brings together the most unlikely allies to achieve the impossible." As they worked side by side in the cramped medical bay, Jackson found himself opening up to Nera Solis in a way he hadn't with anyone in years. He told her about his life as a smuggler, the thrill of the hunt for rare artifacts, and the constant dance of staying one step ahead of the law. In turn, Nera Solis shared stories of her research, her eyes lighting up as she described the wonders she had seen on distant worlds. Jackson found himself captivated not just by her tales, but by her passion, her unwavering belief in the power of science to change lives. Hours passed like minutes as they worked tirelessly. Nirasolis's fingers flew over holographic interfaces, analyzing Jackson's blood and comparing it to samples she had collected from the planet's atmosphere. Jackson assisted as best he could, following her instructions and marveling at the complexity of the work. As the ship's power levels dwindled, a sense of urgency filled the air. Nirasolis's movements became more frantic. Her brow furrowed in concentration. Jackson could see the toll the work was taking on her, noticed the slight tremor in her hands and the way she occasionally paused to take deep, steadying breaths. "Nirasolis," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You need to rest. You're pushing yourself too hard." She shook her head, not looking up from her work. "We don't have time for rest, Jackson. Every moment we delay, more people die. I won't let that happen. Not again." The pain in her voice was palpable, and Jackson realized there was more to her story than she had shared. "What happened?" he asked softly. "What drives you to risk everything for strangers on a prison planet?" Nirasolis's hands stilled, her luminous eyes clouding with memory. For a moment, Jackson thought she wouldn't answer. Then, with a deep breath, she began to speak. 5 years ago, I was part of a research team studying a newly discovered planet in the Andromeda sector. We thought we had taken all necessary precautions, but we were wrong. There was a pathogen in the atmosphere, something our scanners couldn't detect. By the time we realized the danger, it was too late. Her voice faltered, and Jackson instinctively placed a comforting hand on her arm. The warmth of her skin beneath his palm was a stark reminder of how alien she was. Yet in that moment, their shared pain bridged the gap between their species. "I was the only survivor," Nirasolis continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I watched as my colleagues, my friends, succumbed to the pathogen. I couldn't save them. Since then, I've dedicated my life to studying alien pathogens, determined to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again." Jackson felt a newfound respect for Nirasolis wash over him. Her dedication, born from personal loss, was a stark contrast to his own self-serving past. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling inadequate in the face of her pain. "But Nirasolis, you can't blame yourself for what happened. You're not responsible for saving everyone." Nirasolis's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of grief and determination. "Perhaps not, but I am responsible for trying. Every life we save here, on this planet that the rest of the galaxy has written off as a lost cause, is a victory. It's a chance to make amends for those I couldn't save before." Her words struck a chord deep within Jackson. He had spent years running from his past, from the consequences of his actions. But here was Nirasolis, facing her demons head-on, channeling her pain into a force for good. In that moment, he made a decision. "We're going to do this," Jackson said, his voice filled with newfound resolve. "Whatever it takes, we're going to find that cure and save as many lives as we can. You're not in this alone anymore, Nirasolis. I'm with you all the way." A smile, small but genuine, graced Nirasolis's features. "Thank you, Jackson," she said softly. "Now, let's get back to work. We have lives to save." With renewed determination, they turned back to their tasks. As the hours wore on, Jackson found himself marveling at Nirasolis's brilliance. Her fingers danced across holographic interfaces, manipulating complex molecular structures with an ease that spoke of years of expertise. He did his best to assist, following her instructions and learning more about xenobiology in those few hours than he had in his entire life. As the ship's power levels dropped to critical levels, Naira Solis let out a triumphant cry. "I think we've done it," she exclaimed, her eyes alight with excitement. "Look at this, Jackson." Jackson leaned in, studying the holographic display. To his untrained eye, it looked like a chaotic swirl of molecules, but he could sense Naira Solis's excitement. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "This," Naira Solis said, her voice filled with awe, "is the key to neutralizing the toxins in Kronos 7's atmosphere. Your mutated DNA contains a unique protein sequence that, when synthesized and introduced to the toxins, causes them to break down into harmless compounds." Jackson felt a surge of hope, mixed with disbelief. "You mean we actually did it? We found a cure?" Naira Solis nodded, her smile radiant. "We have the formula. Now we need to synthesize it and find a way to distribute it. But Jackson, this is more than just a cure for the prisoners. If we can prove that this planet can be detoxified, it could change everything. Kronos 7 could be transformed from a death sentence into a chance for rehabilitation." The magnitude of their discovery began to sink in. Jackson had entered this endeavor hoping to save a few lives, maybe earn a shot at redemption. But this could change the entire galaxy's approach to criminal rehabilitation. It was a chance to turn a place of despair into one of hope. However, before Jackson could fully process the implications, a warning klaxon blared through the ship. The lights flickered ominously, and several holographic displays winked out of existence. "No, no, no," Naira Solis cried, her fingers flying over the controls. "We're losing power. Jackson, quickly, help me save the data." They worked frantically, transferring the critical information to portable data crystals as systems failed around them. Just as Jackson copied the last bit of data, the ship's power gave out completely, plunging them into darkness. For a moment, the only light came from Naira Solis's faintly glowing skin. Then emergency lights sputtered to life, casting an eerie red glow throughout the medical bay. "That was too close," Jackson said, his heart pounding. He held up the data crystal, its surface glinting in the dim light. "But we got it. The cure is safe." Naira Solis nodded, relief evident on her face. "Yes, but our work is far from over. We need to find a way to synthesize the cure and distribute it, and we need to do it quickly." As if to emphasize her point, a fit of coughing overcame her. Jackson watched in horror as she doubled over, her body racked with spasms. When she straightened, he saw a faint trace of iridescent blood on her lips. "Naira Solis," he said, his voice tight with concern. "The toxins. They're affecting you, aren't they?" She wiped her mouth, her eyes meeting his with grim determination. "My physiology is different from yours. I've been able to resist the effects longer than most. But yes, the toxins are taking their toll. We don't have much time." The gravity of their situation hit Jackson like a punch to the gut. They had the cure, but no means to produce it on a large scale. They were stuck on a hostile planet with dwindling resources and time, and now Naira Solis's life was on the line too. "We need to move," Jackson said, his smuggler's instincts kicking in. "This crash site is too exposed. We need to find a secure location where we can work on synthesizing the cure without interruption." Naira Solis nodded in agreement. "There's an abandoned research outpost about 10 kilometers from here. I detected it during my initial scans of the planet. If we can reach it, we might find the equipment we need." Jackson helped Naira Solis to her feet, noticing how she leaned on him more than before. 10 kilometers through toxic wasteland, likely crawling with hostile inmates, and who knows what else. Just another day in paradise, right? Despite the direness of their situation, Naira Solis managed a weak smile. Your optimism is touching, Jackson. Let's hope it's enough to see us through. As they prepared to leave the relative safety of the crashed ship, Jackson couldn't help but reflect on how drastically his life had changed in just a few short hours. He had gone from a solitary survivor, focused only on making it through each day, to a man with a mission, one that could potentially save countless lives. He looked at Naira Solis, this brilliant, determined alien who had crash-landed into his life and given him a chance at redemption. As they stepped out into the harsh landscape of Kronos 7, Jackson made a silent vow. He would see this through, no matter the cost, for Naira Solis, for the prisoners of Kronos 7, and for the chance to finally do something truly good with his life. The journey across the toxic wasteland of Kronos 7 was a grueling test of endurance and will. Jackson and Naira Solis moved as quickly as they dared, their progress hindered by the need for caution and Naira Solis's deteriorating condition. The data crystal containing the precious cure formula weighed heavily in Jackson's pocket, a constant reminder of the importance of their mission. As they traversed the barren landscape, Jackson kept a vigilant eye on their surroundings. The prison planet was a dangerous place even under normal circumstances, but now, with the possibility of a cure in their possession, they were potential targets for every desperate inmate and corrupt guard on Kronos 7. "Hold up," Jackson said, pulling Naira Solis behind a rocky outcropping. In the distance, he could make out a group of figures moving across the wasteland. Even from afar, their aggressive postures and makeshift weapons marked them as one of the many gangs that had formed among the inmates. Naira Solis leaned against the rock, her breathing labored. "We can't afford to engage them," she whispered. "We need to conserve our strength and resources." Jackson nodded in agreement, his mind racing through potential strategies. His years as a smuggler had honed his ability to navigate dangerous territories undetected. "We'll skirt around their patrol route," he said, pointing to a series of ravines to their left. "It'll add some time to our journey, but it's safer than risking a confrontation." As they carefully made their way through the treacherous terrain, Jackson found himself constantly checking on Naira Solis. Her normally vibrant blue skin had taken on a sickly pallor, and her movements were becoming increasingly unsteady. Despite her obvious discomfort, she pressed on without complaint, her determination unwavering. "You know," Jackson said as he helped her over a particularly rough patch of ground, "for someone who crashed on this planet by accident, you're handling this whole toxic wasteland trek surprisingly well." Naira Solis managed a weak smile. "My research has taken me to some of the most inhospitable planets in the galaxy, Jackson. Compared to the methane swamps of Nebula 6, this is practically a vacation." Jackson chuckled, admiring her ability to maintain her sense of humor even in their dire circumstances. "Remind me to book my next getaway somewhere else then." As they continued their arduous journey, the harsh landscape of Kronos 7 seemed to grow even more foreboding. Strange, twisted vegetation began to appear, plants that had adapted to thrive in the toxic environment. Their leaves were a sickly yellow-green, and they emitted a faint phosphorescent glow in the perpetual twilight of the planet. "Fascinating," Naira Solis murmured, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fatigue. She reached out to touch one of the plants, but Jackson quickly caught her hand. "I wouldn't," he warned. "On a planet like this, even the plants are probably deadly." No sooner had the words left his mouth than a nearby cluster of the glowing vegetation suddenly sprang to life. Vine-like tendrils shot out, whipping through the air with alarming speed. Jackson yanked Nera Solis back, just as one of the tendrils grazed his arm, leaving a burning welt in its wake. "Run!" Jackson shouted, half-dragging Nera Solis as they fled from the suddenly animated plant life. Behind them, more and more of the toxic flora came to life, creating a nightmarish forest of writhing, glowing tendrils. They sprinted through the wasteland, dodging the grasping vines and leaping over crevices in the unstable ground. Jackson's lungs burned with the exertion, the toxic air making each breath a struggle. Beside him, Nera Solis stumbled, her weakened state making it difficult for her to keep up. Without hesitation, Jackson scooped her up into his arms, ignoring the protests of his muscles as he continued to run. Nera Solis's arms wrapped around his neck, her face pressed against his chest as she fought to catch her breath. Finally, after what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, they burst out of the area of hostile vegetation. Jackson didn't slow down until they were well clear of the danger zone. When he finally came to a stop, his legs were shaking with exhaustion. Gently, he set Nera Solis down, both of them collapsing to the ground as they gasped for air. As the adrenaline began to fade, Jackson became acutely aware of the burning pain in his arm where the tendril had struck him. Nera Solis noticed his discomfort and immediately shifted into action. "Let me see," she said, gently taking his arm. The welt had grown angry and inflamed, a spiderweb of dark veins spreading out from the point of contact. "That doesn't look good," Jackson said, trying to keep his voice light, despite the worry gnawing at him. Nera Solis's brow furrowed as she examined the wound. "The plant's toxin is potent," she said, her voice tight with concern. "If you weren't already immune to this planet's poisons, it could have been fatal. As it is, your body is fighting it off, but it's going to be painful for a while." Jackson nodded, gritting his teeth against the burning sensation. "Just add it to the list of things trying to kill us on this lovely planet," he said wryly. Despite the gravity of their situation, Nera Solis let out a small laugh. "Your resilience is remarkable, Jackson," she said, her eyes meeting his with a warmth that made his heart skip a beat. "Thank you for saving me back there." "Any time," Jackson replied softly, suddenly very aware of how close they were sitting. For a moment, the danger surrounding them faded away, and all he could focus on was the gentle touch of Nera Solis's hand on his arm, and the way her luminous eyes seemed to see right through him. The moment was broken by a distant rumble, a reminder that they were still very much in hostile territory. Nera Solis's expression turned serious once more. "We should keep moving," she said, struggling to her feet. "The outpost can't be far now." Jackson stood, ignoring the protests of his tired muscles and the throbbing pain in his arm. As they set off once more, he found himself hyper-aware of Nera Solis's presence beside him. Something had shifted between them during their mad dash through the toxic jungle, a connection forging in the crucible of shared danger. As they pressed on towards their destination, Jackson realized that his determination to see this mission through had taken on a new dimension. It wasn't just about redemption anymore, or even about saving the prisoners of Kronos 7. Now, it was personal. He was fighting for Nera Solis, for the brilliant, compassionate woman who had given him a reason to be more than just a survivor. The toxic wasteland seemed to stretch endlessly before them, each step a battle against exhaustion and the planet's hostile environment. But Jackson drew strength from Nera Solis's unwavering resolve, and together they pushed forward, their shared goal giving them the will to overcome every obstacle Kronos 7 threw in their path. As the hours wore on, the landscape began to change subtly. The craggy rocks gave way to more even terrain, and in the distance, Jackson could make out the faint outlines of structures on the horizon. His heart leaped with hope. They were nearing the abandoned research outpost. "Nira Solis," he said, gently shaking her. She had been leaning on him more heavily over the past hour, her steps becoming increasingly unsteady. "Look, I think we're almost there." Nira Solis lifted her head, her eyes focusing on the distant structures. A weak smile played across her lips. "We made it," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I wasn't sure we would." Jackson tightened his arm around her waist, supporting her as they made their final approach. "Of course, we made it," he said with forced cheerfulness. "I told you, I'm your lucky charm." As they drew closer to the outpost, Jackson's smuggler instincts kicked into high gear. The facility appeared abandoned, but appearances could be deceiving, especially on a planet like Kronos 7. He scanned the area for any signs of recent activity or potential threats. The outpost was a sprawling complex of interconnected domes and low buildings, all constructed of a dull, gray material that seemed to absorb the sickly light of Kronos 7's sky. Many of the structures showed signs of damage, cracked walls, collapsed sections, and long-dead vegetation creeping over the ruins. "We need to be careful," Jackson said in a low voice. "This place might look deserted, but it could be home to all sorts of nasty surprises." Nira Solis nodded weakly. "The main research facility should be in the central dome," she said, pointing to the largest structure in the complex. "If any equipment survived, that's where we'll find it." They approached the entrance to the central dome, a massive airlock that had long since lost power. Jackson examined the mechanism, his experienced eyes quickly assessing the situation. "I think I can get this open," he said, pulling out a set of makeshift tools he had fashioned during his months on Kronos 7. As Jackson worked on bypassing the airlock's security, Nira Solis kept watch, her eyes scanning the desolate landscape around them. The eerie silence of the abandoned outpost was unnerving, broken only by the occasional gust of wind and the metallic sounds of Jackson's work on the door. Finally, with a hiss of escaping air, the airlock creaked open. Jackson helped Nira Solis inside, then quickly sealed the door behind them. The interior of the dome was dark and musty, the air stale, but mercifully free of the toxic elements that permeated the planet's atmosphere. Jackson fumbled in his pocket, producing a small light source he had scavenged from his crashed ship. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a scene of abandonment and decay. Dust covered every surface, and the remains of long-dead equipment littered the floor. "We need to find the main research lab," Nira Solis said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "It should have the equipment we need to synthesize the cure." They moved cautiously through the facility, their footsteps echoing ominously in the empty corridors. Jackson kept a vigilant watch for any signs of danger, but the outpost seemed truly abandoned. The only sounds were their own breathing and the occasional creak of the structure settling. After what felt like hours of searching, they finally found the main laboratory. Unlike the rest of the facility, this room showed signs of having been sealed off, protecting its contents from the worst of the decay. Nira Solis's eyes lit up as she surveyed the equipment. "This is perfect," she said, her voice filled with renewed energy. "With these resources, we should be able to synthesize enough of the cure to start testing it on a small scale." And as Nira Solis set to work, Jackson took on the role of assistant and protector. He helped her set up the equipment, following her instructions to the best of his ability. When he wasn't actively assisting, he kept watch, always alert for any potential threats. The hours blurred together as they worked tirelessly. Nirasolis's condition continued to deteriorate, but she pushed through, her determination never wavering. Jackson watched her with a mixture of admiration and concern, marveling at her strength, even as he worried about the toll this was taking on her health. Finally, after what seemed like days but was likely only hours, Nirasolis let out a triumphant cry. "We did it!" she exclaimed, holding up a vial of iridescent liquid. "The first batch of the cure is ready." Jackson felt a surge of hope and excitement. "That's amazing, Nirasolis. But how do we know it works?" Nirasolis's expression turned serious. "There's only one way to be sure," she said, her eyes meeting his. "We need to test it." Jackson's heart sank as he realized what she was implying. "No," he said firmly. "Absolutely not. We're not testing it on you, Nirasolis. It's too dangerous." "We don't have a choice, Jackson," Nirasolis replied, her voice gentle but resolute. "I'm already infected. If it works, it could save my life. If it doesn't, well, at least we'll know." Jackson wanted to argue, to find another way, but he knew she was right. They were out of options and out of time. With a heavy heart, he nodded his agreement. Nirasolis took a deep breath, then lifted the vial to her lips. Jackson watched, his heart pounding, as she swallowed the iridescent liquid. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Nirasolis's body began to glow, a soft light emanating from beneath her skin. Jackson rushed to her side as she swayed on her feet. He caught her just as her knees buckled, lowering her gently to the ground. "Nirasolis," he called, his voice tight with fear. "Nirasolis, can you hear me?" For several agonizing seconds, there was no response. Then slowly, Nirasolis's eyes fluttered open. The sickly pallor that had overtaken her skin was fading, replaced by her natural, healthy glow. She took a deep breath, then another, her eyes widening in wonder.